my name is Ashley, and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 4-year-old named Kylie, and I also have a 2-year-old named Mia. Now, there is a question that I receive quite often, and it goes a little something like this. Help, we speak 2 or 3 different languages in our home. How can I help my child learn to be bilingual? Now, I am not an expert on this topic. However, my husband is Taiwanese and he does speak a fairly fluent amount of Mandarin Chinese, primarily just with his parents. But we have been exploring over the last couple of months some ways to incorporate more bilingualism into our own home with our girls, because right now they are only English speaking. And so over the course of that time, I have conducted quite a bit of my own independent study and research, and I am always more than happy to share with you guys things that I have learned along the way. So from one busy parent to another, today I would like to share with you 5 essential steps that I have learned will truly make a difference when you are trying to encourage bilingualism in your Montessori home. Now, throughout this video today, I'm going to be using the term bilingual to refer to any number of languages beyond just one. For a very long time, bilingual was intended to only mean 2 different languages, and then the term multilingual was used to refer to 3 or more languages. However, over time that has changed, and now the accepted term is bilingual for any number of languages beyond just one, and then for a family who only speaks one language at home, they would be considered monolingual. And just to add on to that, something else that experts generally agree upon is that there is no one level of proficiency that you or your child need to reach in order to consider yourself bilingual. If you are speaking more than one language in certain contexts outside of your home or in your home where you are using actively these different languages, then you are considered bilingual. So you don't have to speak like a native in these other languages in order to consider yourself bilingual. Because really, it's very complex and it's going to come down to your family's unique situation. So for example, you might have a family who is speaking the minority language at home, and then they're speaking the dominant language of the community outside of the home. Or you might have a family who is speaking 2 or 3 different minority languages at home, and then their child is going to school and they're learning English, but perhaps they're living abroad, and so the community speaks an entirely other different language. So there's actually 4 languages going on. It can really be very different, and all these factors will come into play. So here's what we do know. Dr. Montessori identified the sensitive period for language in children as being from birth until the age of 6 years old. And so in those first 6 years, that is really a critical time to start exposing our children to all of the languages that we want for them to learn, because that is when they're going to most easily be able to pick them up, at least compared to an adult. But we also know that within that time frame, the first year of a child's life is going to be the absolute easiest time for them to absorb all of the sounds of the home languages that they're hearing every single day. So that is the time that they are going to be like little sponges, soaking it all in very naturally without even realizing it. After the age of 1, it's not quite as easy. It's not as effortless and unconscious as it was when they were infants. And so they are going to have to put in a little bit more effort into mastering any of the various different languages that they're hearing around them. And that brings me right into the first of our 5 essential steps for encouraging bilingualism at home. And that is to start them young. Again, those first 6 years, that sensitive period for language, and really up to about age 4 is even more critical for you to begin introducing and reinforcing all of the different languages that you're hoping for your child to be able to use proficiently as they get older. Because here's the thing, during that time period, those first 4 to 6 years, the younger they start being exposed and practicing using all of these languages, the much more likely it is that they're actually going to sound like a native speaker when they're older. So if you've ever questioned whether or not it's too early to start introducing other languages to your child, the answer is no. The earlier they are when they start, the easier it's going to be for them, and the much better off they're going to be as they continue on their journey. All right, step number 2 is to talk to your child every day in your home language, or in your home languages if you have more than one, because it's all about exposure. And there are a couple of different different ways to go about this. So the first one is called one parent, one language, which is exactly what it sounds like. You have one parent who is speaking one language only to your child, and that is the only language they ever communicate with them in. And then you have the other parent speaking the other language to their child 24/7. And the idea here is that your child is receiving exposure and input in both of those languages very regularly. Another way to do it is only speaking the minority language or languages at home and then speaking the other language out in the community. And then you also have something called school-based bilingualism, which is where your child is speaking your home language or languages at home with you, and then in school they're learning an entirely different language, and that language might not necessarily even be the same as the language of the greater community. And finally, there's something called domains of use, which is where you're dividing up the different languages that you're using across different times and places. So maybe you decide that during a family meal you are only going to speak one specific language, or maybe when you're out in the community, going to church for example, that you might only speak the language of the community there. But the most important part of talking to your child every day in your home language or languages is that that conversation is happening face to face, from human to human, especially under the age of 4. There is an overwhelming amount of research out there that supports the fact that very young children simply cannot learn another language from a screen. So they can't get it from listening to audiobooks or from watching a screen or playing a game on the iPad. It actually has to come from a human in order for it to sink in. Beyond the age of 4, they are capable, at least to an extent, of picking up some language from these different forms of technology. But before that, it has to be a human interaction basis. Now, step number 3 is read to your child in your home language as often as you possibly can. You are looking for rich vocabulary input here. So read books in your home language to your child. Make sure that they're seeing the writing on the page. They can see what the letters look like and they're hearing it coming from a native speaker. And beyond just reading, make sure that you're also asking them active questions as you're reading to make sure that they're actually understanding it. And along with that, you can offer your child some Montessori style language activities in your home language. So if you want to set up a matching activity where they're matching objects to cards that have an identical or similar picture on it of whatever the object is, but then the label at the bottom is written in your home language, and then they're hearing it from you if you're doing the activity with them. Or you can also try something called labeling the environment, where you're writing down the names of various different objects and things that are around your home, and you're having your child go and place the label on that particular thing, but you can make sure that all of the labels are being written and read and you're saying them in your home language to help reinforce that. Step number 4 is to consider quality versus quantity. So it is definitely going to come down to the balance of input that your child is receiving in the various different languages. The amount of exposure that your child has to each of the different languages is really going to determine how proficient they become in each of those languages. So even though you might be speaking 2 different languages at home or more than that, if your child is only using one of the languages for, 2 or 3 hours one day on the weekend, and then the rest of the time they're using this other language, then they're not really ever going to have an opportunity to become very proficient in that other language that they're only using on the weekends. So you want to figure out what you can do circumstantially for your family to help balance it out as much as possible if you like your child to be fairly fluent in each of them. So that's kind of the quantity portion of it. But you also want to look at the quality of the language that they're receiving, especially in your home language, because often as parents, we get caught up in this very common, everyday, conversational type of language. We're saying a lot of the same phrases to them day in and day out as we're going through our routine. And so they're words that our child is just hearing repeatedly. We want to balance that with a lot of rich vocabulary input as well. And that's where a lot of that reading with your child comes into play. You also want to talk and read with your child in your home language about things that they're learning about in school. So you might even have to go and contact your child's teacher to find out what those topics are, but your child needs to hear those same vocabulary terms and they need to have those same conversations that they're having in school also in their home language to make sure that they're getting it as evenly as possible. And you also want to make sure that you're talking to your child in your home language about things that are important to your child, things that interest them, no matter how frivolous it might seem to you. Because if your child doesn't see a need to use your home language, if they don't feel like it's that important, then they're just not going to use it. But if you can interest them in using the home language by talking to them about things that they're interested in, then they're going to be much more likely to converse with you about it and actually practice that home language. So naturally, you might be wondering to yourself, well, can I use the other language at all? Is that going to mess it up for my child if I slip and use the other language in front of them instead of using my home language? And the short answer is no. So long as you are making sure that you're very consistent, that a vast majority of the time, that you are always using your home language with your child, then the couple of times that you slip up is not really going to affect things in the long run. It's when you start slipping just over time, constantly falling into this trap of using the other language and kind of foregoing the home language just because it's easier. When that starts to become the norm, that's when things might actually start to shift. So try to be as consistent as you can in using your home language, and then the little minor things that happen here and there are not really going to matter. And finally, step number 5 is to involve others. This means your child's other caregivers, other family members, and your child's school. You want to involve them directly in your plans, your language goals for your child. This way, everyone is on the same page. You cannot just assume that they know what's going on or what you're hoping for your child to be able to accomplish in the various different languages. You need to sit down and have a direct conversation with these other people. So for example, you might decide that you want your child to become a little more proficient in a certain language that maybe they're not receiving enough input in at home. And so instead of sending them to the community daycare where they're going to hear the dominant language of the community, instead you might decide to hire a caregiver who comes into your home who also happens to be a native speaker. And so you want to make sure that you have that conversation with that person and say, hey, listen, I want them to become more proficient in your native language. And so I want you to use that language with my child as much as you possibly can, even if it's not the easiest method of communication. If you have native speaking family and relatives that you can go visit regularly with your child so that they can have more of that exposure, or maybe even go to your home country for a full-on immersion experience, that can only benefit your child in the long run for helping to gain in proficiency in that language. And you also want to involve the school. Make sure that your child's teachers are aware of what languages your child is speaking at home and what your language goals are for your child as far as their proficiency in the home language and their proficiency in whatever the dominant language is that's being used at school. The one thing that you want to be aware of, though, when you are having conversations with the staff at your child's school is that not every school is fully equipped to understand the developmental needs of bilingual students. And so sometimes they might assume that your child has some sort of a delay going on or some special needs, when in reality they don't. It's just that they're bilingual and they need more time to process and they need to transfer between languages, and this takes time. And so there really isn't a delay present at all. And unfortunately, this is a very common misconception. It's just not true that children who are bilingual are going to naturally experience delays or have special needs of some kind. That is not true. Experts who actually understand about the needs of bilingual children will tell you that if there is a delay, a true delay present in your child, it was going to be present whether or not they were bilingual. So if anyone ever tells you that your child has a delay because they're bilingual, or that you need to stop using your home language because it is causing learning delays for your child, then the experts will tell you, don't listen to that person. Of course, if you are genuinely concerned, then definitely have your child assessed by a specialist who has experience in working with bilingual children. This way, they actually know the kinds of tests to administer to your child to get accurate results. Otherwise, they're just going to administer the same kinds of tests that they give to children who only speak one language, and it might reveal a delay that really isn't present. So make sure you do your homework as a parent and find somebody who is adequately prepared to actually assess your child. The bottom line is that using your home language with your child is not ever going to impede them. Quite the opposite, it actually really can only help them because they need to maintain a proper level of cognitive development in order to be mentally equipped to tackle this new language that they're learning at an age-appropriate level. So it really only has benefits, and there is no reason to ever stop using your home language. So one last parting word of advice that I have for you is to simply be patient. It takes time for our children to learn other languages, even when they're little. It's not an easy process, and every child's level of motivation is going to be different. Some kids are going to pick it up very easily, and for others, they're just not really going to be into it, or maybe it's just more of a struggle for them. So just try to be patient, be supportive, continue using your home language with your child as often as you can, because you never know at what point in their lives they're suddenly going to decide that they really are invested and interested in being able to speak your home language. And so you don't want to close doors on them before they even have that opportunity. Because once your child is past those initial golden years in their childhood, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to acquire that language down the road. Again, guys, I am not an expert. These are just the things that I have learned in my own journey as a parent in hopefully helping my children to become bilingual. So I hope that you found something useful that you can take away and implement with your own children at home. However, if you are looking to dive a little bit deeper into learning about bilingualism and you want some more information from the real experts, then I left links to a couple of really great resources in the description box down below that I would highly recommend. If you are interested in learning more about doing Montessori at home or positive discipline parenting, I offer a couple of e-courses that walk you through it step by step. So I will also be sure to leave a link to that as well in the description box down below. And just in case you are new to my channel, I also wanted to let you know that this video is part of a much larger series on this YouTube channel called Montessori at Home, which is aimed at providing practical tips and advice for busy parents like you and I for implementing Montessori at home with our children. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in watching more of, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I do upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.